very gracious of all of you to join us this evening on the margins of the Asia Clean Energy Forum, an annual event that's typically held in Manila, hosted by the Asian Development Bank in very close collaboration with the United States Agency for International Development, or USAID. This year being brought to you virtually for the obvious reasons. We wish and hope that all of you joining us this evening and your families are safe and healthy, and that you're taking the proper precautions that public health professionals are recommending. But thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule from around the world and all over Asia to be a part of this really interesting and very, very exciting opportunity to discuss cross-border power trade and future energy markets throughout Asia. We're going to focus on two regions of Asia this evening, of course, the Southeast Asian examples and, of course, the South Asian examples that are so prevalent today and that all of you are working so hard to make happen. It's going to be an interesting presentation, but it's going to go rather quickly, because I do want to sort of highlight the fact that we have a number of presentations to start off with, 3 of them to be exact, case studies that will look at interesting things such as overcoming barriers to power trade and the cross-border electricity trade in South Asia, and redesigning the power markets as an enabler for renewable energy integration and multilateral trade. We have a panel this evening of very honorable, high-profile guests who are going to share their thoughts with us based on some questions that we'll provide. And there is an opportunity for those of you in the audience to also provide us with some questions. You'll notice there's a chat function on the screen to the bottom right, I believe it is. And that is an opportunity for you to write in your questions and comments. So please take advantage of that and do it throughout the evening. Very quick couple comments I want to make on what we are all doing in this area. It is important to note that there's a bunch of folks that we work with without whom we would never get, of course, the kind of outcomes that we hope for in this work. But our friends at Deloitte, our friends at Irade, our good friends at Apt Associates, the good friends at G2G Rise, that is in fact Deloitte, our program called SARI, South Asia Regional Initiative for Energy Integration, and CPA. Those are all very important actors in this discussion, and we'll be hearing from them this evening. So let me start off. My name is Michael Satin, and I'm the Director of the Office of Clean Energy and Environment at USAID in India, based at the American Embassy in New Delhi. On behalf of USAID, I welcome you all to today's side event on cross-border power trade and future energy markets, organized as part of the Asia Clean Energy Forum 2020. We have with us, as I've mentioned, a distinguished panel of experts from the Government of India, the International Energy Agency, United Nations ESCAP, the Indian Energy Exchange Ltd, and USAID partners from all over the region. The webinar is meant to explore opportunities to address political, institutional, and technical barriers for increased power trade in Asia, but it'll also answer questions on how power markets can enhance opportunities for developing and harnessing variable renewable energy. You know, over the past several years, USAID's been working in Southeast Asia and in South Asia to support regional energy integration and clean energy development. And we'll be sharing a few of those lessons from USAID's energy program in India in today's webinar. Why would we invest time, energy, human resources, and money in this area? I think the answer is somewhat obvious, but just for those of you who may have just joined us for the first time, the investments in regional energy integration will create markets, will accelerate the development of technologies, will create demand, and will also provide impetus for those organizations producing clean energy to work together and find out how to exploit that marketplace and provide reliable, clean, and affordable energy to the populations of Southeast Asia and South Asia. That's why we're here today, and that's why we do the work we do. USAID's South Asia Regional Initiative for Energy, or SARI program, has been working in South Asia since around 2000 and to create an enabling environment for cross-border power trade and regional energy markets. This is through interventions focused around harmonizing legal and policy frameworks, 1, creating technical capacity to transmit power transnationally, 2, and developing a functional regional power market, 3. Those 3 things we believe are the key to sort of putting together a regionally integrated power system that will provide reliable, affordable, clean power for the billion-plus people here in South Asia. The same is being done in Southeast Asia with our friends at USAID in Thailand and a number of other missions in the region. At the same time, we've been supporting the government of India in our work in its endeavor to deploy, I'm sure you've all heard the figure, 175 gigawatts of renewable energy by 2022. Our program, Greening the Grid, or G2G, you'll hear that a lot today, G2G Rise, G2G, Greening the Grid. It's all the same, but it's a spectacular look at how to put together a power sector laboratory to look at the various interventions that will bring about greater integration of renewable energy, that will bring about a modernized grid system, and that will make energy generation and energy distribution more efficient for really what is a massive weighting on the part of the public. This has been through interventions such as modeling studies, demonstrations of cutting-edge technologies and solutions, as well as exchanges with counterparts in the US and other countries on topics related to large-scale integration of renewable energy. So one of the key areas to focus on under the G2G Rise initiative is redesigning of power markets, where USAID has supported the government of India. We understand the power of the energy markets, we understand the complexity of energy markets, and we've tried to bring a model that the countries in the region can look at and examine and then alter in ways that are more appropriate for their environment. I want to congratulate really a friend of mine who I've been able to sit on the dais with on many occasions, Dr. Chatterjee from CERC, the Indian Central Regulator, and one of our panel members today you'll hear from later on the recent launch of the real-time electricity market, or RTM as we call it here in India. It's a huge step towards a robust grid and an efficient power market, not only for the country, but also for South Asia. And I believe for other regions outside of South Asia, as India and South Asia look east to their Southeast Asian neighbors, and as they look west to the Middle East and the stands, there's opportunities to open up markets completely throughout Asia and really build on what they're doing here today. Congratulations to Dr. Chatterjee and his team. We'll be talking more about RTM in today's discussion. Similarly, in Southeast Asia, USAID's RDMA, the Regional Development Mission for Asia program, Clean Power Asia, or CPA as we often refer to it, has been focused on accelerating regional transition in the lower Mekong and all of Southeast Asia to a high-performing, low-carbon power sector. And why that may sound straightforward and kind of obvious, this has been a big investment through a variety of interventions such as power sector planning, supportive policy frameworks, mobilizing finance, and promoting regional cooperation. Not an easy task, but something that the RDMA and other missions in Southeast Asia have already shown some very good successes on. CPA, by the way, has been supporting the Southeast Asian countries, or ASEAN, in establishing and updating national renewable energy targets and integrating these into the power development plans. A very significant step because it takes it out of the theoretical and puts it into the concrete. USAID, in partnership with ASEAN Center for Energy and the heads of ASEAN power utilities and authorities, is updating the ASEAN Integrated Master Plan to reflect ASEAN's 23% of primary energy, renewable energy target. 23% ASEAN has set for itself as a target to integrate renewable energy over the next several years. Ambitious, but doable, and together, we believe it's something that can happen. Without taking any more of your time, let me take you through today's events very quickly, which will weave into 3 presentations around 2 themes, which are, as I mentioned, exploring opportunities and approaches to increase bilateral and multilateral power trade, and 2, designing of power markets to enable large-scale integration of renewable energy. The presentations will be followed by a panel discussion focusing on lessons learned in South Asia and Southeast Asia around these 2 topics. Let me just, as we move forward, let me just get into a couple pieces of housekeeping so that we are all on the same page. There's a lot of people online tonight joining us, and we're incredibly grateful for your participation. We're looking forward to this discussion. A couple things that make it easier for our presenters and for the rest of the audience is if, as you're on your computer, if you could please make sure that you turn your microphone off and you keep it that way until you have need for it to address the crowd by speaking. And the same with your video. If you could turn your camera off and keep your name on the screen, it'll tell us who you are and where you're from. But that allows everybody else to hear more clearly. It allows us to take the greatest advantage of the broadband internet and the online video conferencing tool that we're using this evening. If and when you do come online to speak, please turn on your mic, please turn on your video, please present to a waiting audience who look forward to hearing from you. And when you're finished, then turn your mic and your video off once again to provide some courtesy for the other people who will speak. That's the ground rules for today. I'm going to jump right into this program and wish all of our participants and our presenters the best. And this is what it looks like. We'll do 3 case studies tonight. We will do case studies brought to us on overcoming barriers to power trade, on cross-border electricity trade in South Asia, and on redesigning power markets as an enabler for renewable energy integration. So let's get started. We're very pleased to bring to the podium this evening Randy Christensen. And Randy is working in the gas, coal, and power division at IEA, where she works on power systems flexibility and market reform and cross-border trading. Her work has focused in large part on ASEAN, China, and India. So she's truly an expert in the region on these particular issues. So without further delay, allow me to welcome and thank Randy Christensen for being with us tonight. Randy, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Michael, and thank you so much for inviting me to this important event. If I could have the first slide, please. Let's see. Yeah, just shift 1. Thank you. So my case study will take its starting point in a study published by the IEA in August 2019 on multilateral power trade in Southeast Asia. The study will show that multilateral power trade has several benefits, but there are minimum requirements that need to be fulfilled for multilateral power trade to begin. And as well, the IEA found 3 main categories of models that could form the basis for this power trade in Southeast Asia. Next slide, please. So if we start with the background, in 2017, the IEA was asked by the ASEAN Power Grid Consultative Committee and the ASEAN Power heads of power utilities and authorities, HAPUA and APGCC, to develop a feasibility study on establishing multilateral power trade among the ASEAN member states, AMS. So this is only one of 3 studies that's going into the massive effort in establishing the ASEAN power grid and trading between the ASEAN member states. The first one is a study on institutions that was undertaken by AREA. The second one, as Michael mentioned, is the infrastructure piece, AIMS, which is undertaken by USAID and ASEAN Center for Energy. And the last one is this feasibility study that I'll be talking about, which very much highlights the trading framework that could be possible in Southeast Asia. So the feasibility study in and of itself is designed to provide enough context and direction to support development on multilateral power trade right away. There is no need for the ASEAN member states to wait for the interconnection master plan because they already are interconnected. There already are cross-border lines that can be traded on. Next slide, please. So why would it be a benefit to establish multilateral power trade? So there are specific actions, and this study is meant for a wide range of stakeholders, both policymakers, regulators, and utilities. What's important to say is that multilateral power trade has a multitude of benefits. So environmental. Multilateral power trade does allow for higher integration of renewables and does align with the target of the 23% that Michael mentioned earlier. It is also a a way to potentially lower the cost of power in the different regions by taking advantage of the flexibility to meet your power consumption by several resources across the border. And it also does provide security benefits, especially when you're integrating higher shares of renewables. When you expand your balancing area, it becomes more easy to take advantage of regional or geographical or consumption differences among regions. Next slide, please. So as I said, we did identify some minimum requirements for establishing multilateral power trade, and we've categorized it into 3 main buckets. The first bucket, which is definitely not unimportant, is political. So there needs to be a certain level of political will to establish multilateral power trade. This can happen through intergovernmental agreements, and also very kind of low-key topics have to be aligned, some like common working language. You also have a technical bucket, which can be bigger or smaller depending on the level of integration, but some basis needs to be formed on, for example, technical standards, grid codes, wheeling methodologies. There needs to be established third-party access for the grids. This is not to say that you need to restructure your internal market. It's just to say you need to allow wheeling through your grid, for example, or access from outside parties to supply your grid with energy. You also need to share certain data and information. This can be on available capacity. You also need to agree on how do you actually calculate the available capacity on cross-border lines. The last one is institutional. So here in Southeast Asia, you already have institutions that can help bring forward multilateral power trading. You have the heads of the utilities, HAPWA, that is already doing massive work on the technical buckets. You have the ASEAN Energy Regulators Network, ERN, which is a relatively new network. So there might be some need to develop this network to make sure that it supports multilateral power trade. And then currently there would be a need to develop a regional coordinator or a market operator, depending on the level of integration. And lastly, there needs to be an agreement on a payment and settlement mechanism. All these things need to be worked on and agreed before the actual designing of the model can take place. Next slide, please. So after the minimum requirements are met, the multilateral power trade in ASEAN will definitely be possible. It's very important to state that we do propose 3 trade models, but they are based on a, they're not a ladder, so you shouldn't take model 1 to go to model 2 to go to model 3. It's based on stepwise and voluntary implementation, and the ASEAN member states themselves should decide which models they want to participate in and which ones they do not want to. So the models are to some extent compatible with each other and can exist in parallel in different subregions, for example, depending on the wish for integration from the ASEAN member states themselves. The first model we propose we call Harmonized Bilateral Trading, which is very much a near-term option where you develop on the bilateral trading that's already occurring in the region, and you develop a harmonized set of frameworks that can be utilized. For example, a template for contracts so that you don't have to renegotiate the contract template every time you do bilateral trading. This will facilitate faster trading and also sharing of information on possible trading routes. The second model we call a secondary trading model. That's a more medium-term option where the ASEAN member states themselves will have clearing of their own internal markets, and then afterwards they can trade based on excesses and deficits in their country. This is a good model for the medium term because it means that you clear your own market first and you don't have the complete resource sharing that you would in the higher integrated models. So this would mean that lower price countries would not have the price evening out as you would see in the highly integrated models. So model 3 is exactly this. That is what we call the primary trading model, where the multilateral power market would would go in and take over for national power markets. So this is the type of power market you see currently in Europe or some places in the US, where territories totally share resources. So in this situation, you would have a certain evening out of the prices across countries, depending on the level of interconnection available. Next slide, please. So if we put this all together, we see a possible future for ASEAN. Right now you have unharmonized, what we call unharmonized bilateral trading, plus an effort called LTM, and S in brackets. So that's Laos, Thailand, Malaysia, and Singapore. This is a structure where they can trade together already, and other ASEAN member states outside of this framework can trade together. So that is not a harmonized, but an unharmonized bilateral setting. In the future, you could see a situation where all ASEAN member states can trade together in a more harmonized bilateral fashion. You could also imagine that some ASEAN member states would go for the secondary trading model, and another subset of ASEAN member states would go for the primary trading model. But that does not mean that these member states cannot trade together. It's actually possible for the countries with the primary trading model to trade with secondary trading model. So this is to say, it's not our recommendation or vision that Southeast Asia necessarily ever go for the primary trading model and total integration. That is definitely up to the Southeast Asian member states themselves, or the ASEAN member states themselves. And this is a development that is very important for the ASEAN member states to agree on internally. Next slide. So if I come back to the key messages of this report, there are several benefits to multilateral power trade, including environmental and cost benefits. There are also minimum requirements that needs to be fulfilled, and the IEA found 3 models that could inform the basis of MPT. Last slide, please. So just to sum up, what are the key lessons and next steps? So the mandate was given at the ASEAN ministers meeting in 2019 to actually bring forward the minimum requirements. And it should and has started as soon as possible. So one of the key things that are really important for Southeast Asia right now is to get the roles and responsibility clearly defined for moving forward with these minimum requirements. And lastly, but not least, the clear and transparent market structures for cross-border trading is a key enabling factor for integrating higher shares of renewable energy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Randy. Excellent presentation. You raised a lot of excellent points that kind of, I think, are fodder for those of people in our audience, as well as the folks who are here on the podium to think about. I think that some of the things that I wanted to ask, I think I'm going to kind of save them because there will probably be similar questions coming up when we open it up for the whole crowd. So thank you, and I'll write my questions into the chat column. I want to keep on time here, so I want to move us forward. The second case study that we are fortunate enough to have tonight is brought to us by Rajiv Ratnapanda, who is a technical lead officer at SARI EI, the South Asia Regional Initiative for Energy Integration implemented by IRADE. Cross-border electricity trade in South Asia transitioning from bilateral to multilateral trade. As many of you, if not all of you know, it certainly is the case that in the last several months, the government in India has presented regulation legislation that has opened up, actually late last year, that has opened up the avenues for multilateral trade, certainly inclusive of India and therefore inclusive of South Asia. So Rajiv this evening is going to talk to us a little bit about that, the implications, and where we go from here. He's currently with IRADE, as I mentioned, working on our SARI program, but he brings considerable experience on policy, regulatory, and legal and market mechanisms for enhancing cross-border electricity trade and regional power market design, specifically here in South Asia. So without further ado, please, Rajiv, thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Michael, and hello, everyone. Pleasure to be a part of ACEF 2020. I will be speaking on the South Asian experiences and will focus on three key areas, that is transitioning from bilateral to trilateral, role of power market in South Asia, and how cross-border power trade can be helped in clean energy integration in South Asia. Next slide, please. Next slide. Many of you maybe know that power trade in South Asia has been increasing consistently over the years since the year 2012, and currently around 3,700 megawatt of cross-border power trade is happening. It has almost increased roughly 2.6 times since the year 2012. However, all of these trades are bilateral in nature. However, as Michael mentioned, trilateral trade has been emphasized. To be very precise, the Bangladesh plans to import around 1 gigawatt from Bhutan and around 3 gigawatt from Nepal through India. The import from Nepal by Bangladesh has reached some stage in the sense that the price negotiation between Bangladesh and the Nepalese power developer has been concluded. Going in future, it is expected that a lot of cross-border transmission capacity is expected to happen, and something around 44 gigawatt of cross-border interconnection can happen by 2040. Next slide, please. On the policy and regulatory fronts, it has been kind of an evolution in the sense that we had the SALT agreement signed in the year 2014, which enables the regional trade and also mentions the trade through bilateral, trilateral, and mutual means. Then, of course, we saw the the MOU on BIMSTEC grid interconnection getting signed between BIMSTEC countries, and then we saw a series of measures by Government of India, starting with guideline on import and export of electricity. And this guideline is very crucial because it allows the trilateral power trade and also allows the trade through power exchanges platform of India. Based on this guideline, CERC, the Central Commission in India, has issued a comprehensive regulation on cross-border trade, which almost addresses many aspects of the cross-border trade, including access, open access, imbalance settlement, and so on and so forth. Then we recently saw the Electricity Amendment Bill of India, where the CBET has been clearly defined, and the definition itself includes the passage of electricity through India between two countries. And very recently we have this one sun, one world and one grid concept. Though it was announced in the year 2018, it's kind of getting some steps currently. Though this vision is not directly related to power trade, but it envisages large-scale grid interconnection between South Asia, Southeast Asia, even with Gulf, and going in future with Africa. So this kind of gives the impression about the overall regional outlook that is evolving in the region. Next slide, please. Speaking on the power market, initially all the cross-border power trade in the South Asian region were basically based on the price negotiation between the parties. However, over the years, the trade to commercial or market basis has been increasing, and currently around 1200 megawatt of power trade is happening on commercial and market basis, which is roughly around 33% of the total power trade in the South Asian region. The region has a lot of demand diversity, daily, weekly, monthly, and seasonal diversities. And in this context, the role of power exchange becomes very, very crucial. Power exchange offers a fair, transparent, and neutral marketplace. It also offers a platform for trilateral and multilateral power trade. We in Saria IRADE have conducted a study on gains from BBI and multilateral electricity trade. And out of many benefits, one of the benefits that we could find from the study is that the capex can be reduced by $17 billion due to the regional trade in the BBIN region. We also conducted a pilot market exercise, which we call South Asia Regional Power Exchange, where we conducted the mock bidding among the Bangladesh, Bhutan, Nepal, Bhutan, and India, and it demonstrated the potential of CBET in day-ahead market in the power exchange platform, which is the most dominant form of market product in the power exchanges. The exercise found that the participants of Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan in power exchanges, the quantum of market clearing volume can be increased in the range of 5 to 7% for the year 2015 and 16. And I also believe that, as Michael also mentioned, real-time market and many other initiatives that is undergoing in India. And some of these new power market initiatives in India also offers an opportunity to leapfrog in cross-border power market design front. Next slide, please. Speaking a little bit on the clean energy part, most of the South Asian countries are focusing on renewable energy, and large-scale renewable energy capacity addition is being planned and proposed. Of course, India has 175 gigawatt by 2020, and there are discussions to increase to 450 gigawatt. Then Bangladesh also plans to add 7.9 gigawatts by 2041. Sri Lanka plans to add have 50% of the generation from renewable energy by 2030. Pakistan also plans to add 16 gigawatt of renewable energy by 2040. Now, as you all know, that renewable energy has its issue of intermittency, and as Randy also mentioned that it can bring flexibility. So in South Asia also, CBT can actually act as a tool for flexibility, managing RE intermittency and grid balancing in the region. And also hydro is also one of the best balancing resources available to us. Unfortunately, the region has a lot of hydro potential in the range of 35 gigawatt, of which only 19% has been developed so far. So all these factors gives an opportunity for developing a regional power market where the balancing services can also be traded, and also maybe in a phased manner, ancillary services can also be traded. We had this recently, the successful 9 p.m. 9-minute event where people in India switched off their light as a symbolic gesture to fight against COVID-19. And during this management of the demand, something around 400 megawatt of flexibility was achieved from hydropower plants in Bhutan. Though this example is not directly related to clean energy integration, but it kind of gives an example that if we have a regional grid balancing can take place. Next slide, please. On the enablers for trilateral, multilateral trade, some of the things Randy also mentioned in his presentation based on the South Asia experiences. We feel that, of course, we need to have a political vision and outlook on the regulatory, technical, and commercial side. Some basic things like access to transmission, identification of the transmission capability, congestion, rules for measurement or imbalance and settlement. Some of these measures should be there. Also, the standard grid codes, some sort of coordinated grid planning. These are some of the things that will be helpful for trilateral and multilateral power trade. On the institutional front, we need to have institutional arrangements, and regional coordination programs are desirable to have. Next slide, please. We in SARI has been working in this area for quite some time, and we have come up with many studies, reports on open access, grid codes, trading licenses, regional regulatory guidelines. Now we are also focusing on implementing some of the recommendations and focusing on implementation and institutionalization to create regional forum like forum of regulator, transmission utilities, system operators, electricity market forum, and so on and so forth. We are also conducting some studies on bilateral to trilateral power trade and how cross-border trade can be used for facilitating grid balancing and developing a framework for ancillary services market in the region. Next slide, please. While some of the points I mentioned, it has its own challenges, but I think with a collective effort and a shared vision, this thing is achievable. And I will end my presentation with the quote that it always feels impossible until it is done. With this, I conclude my presentation. Over to you, Michael.
Thank you very much, my friend. I appreciate your comments and your thoughts, your expertise very much, Rajiv. It's always nice to hear you articulate a message because it's not only accurate and timely, but it presents us with another opportunity to look at the same things over and over again, but with a fresh sort of set of eyes. I like the comment you made on the balancing services can also be traded, something we don't always focus on because we're focused on the energy first. But in fact, as we're integrating renewable energies, we're looking for the avenues that allow us to balance those renewable energies into the power generation distribution scheme. The other thing I thought was really good, I'm very proud of the fact that the 9-minute exercise here in India that happened at the beginning of the COVID-19 circumstance was, as many people didn't recognize, really an experiment, a successful experiment, but an experiment nonetheless that really allowed us to see the impact of what we're doing and the consequences of it. So thank you. Thank you for that conversation. Let me move on to our third and final presenter today, the case study number 3, redesigning the power markets, an enabler to renewable energy integration and multilateral trade. Those of you who know of him, he has been working with our USAID RISE program now for a while. He is a director at Deloitte, India. And I will say simply that he is the electricity markets lead for our program. He has incredible cross-country experience in more than 10 different countries and currently specializing in the area of future of energy and new energy vis-a-vis, for example, battery storage, EVs, power market redesign, and renewable integration. It's a pleasure to have with us this evening. Please welcome Anish Mandal. Anish?
Thank you, Michael, and hello, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be part of ACEF 2020. So today's presentation will be on redesigning the power markets as an enabler to RE integration by highlighting the Indian experience as a learning case for the countries in the region. Now, since the last couple of years, Ripi, if you can go to the next slide. Right. Since the last couple of years, some of these mega trends have been shaping the global power sector. The convergence of transport sector with the electricity sector, with the introduction of electric vehicles, a higher push towards adding renewable energy. Digitalization has become the buzzword in the power sector like many other sectors. The consumers have now more choices and they are becoming much more aware, and they are even becoming prosumers. So all in all, the power sector is headed for a big transformation. And how redesigning of the electricity market can be a key enabler in this transition is the case in point for today's discussion. Now let's understand the industry structure. So almost 90% of the generation capacities in India are tied up to the distribution facilities under long-term 25-year PPAs. So only around 4% of the energy gets traded in the power market in the day-ahead horizon. So there is very little flexibility as well as, I would say, liquidity in the intraday horizon. So introduction of real-time market was always a priority with CRC, because as we add more and more renewables, the system will need more flexibility and resilience. Along with real-time market, two other interventions which were charted out in the roadmap for redesigning of the power market by CRC were market-based procurement of ancillary services to address the inadequacy around reserves, availability of reserves, and as also to introduce new products, faster response products as well. The second proposition was more around centralized dispatch and scheduling in the day-ahead market to address the inefficiency around decentralized dispatch and scheduling within the state control areas. But what was common in all the interventions was the process which CRC followed in analyzing the benefits, in analyzing what these interventions along the three fundamental pillars. Now, these three fundamental pillars were one, a detailed review of the international experiences spanning across US, UK, Europe, and Australian markets. Second was benefits demonstration of these market interventions. And once this is established that these interventions are feasible, these bring benefits. So how do you bring the change or manage the change through regulations, consultations, and statement of reasons, and as well as kind of wide-scale stakeholder consultations. Now let's pause for a minute and focus on what benefits demonstrations of market interventions mean. So, and we pick up real-time market as a case. So when real-time market was conceived, it was apparent that it will bring benefits, right? Bring flexibility in the market, liquidity in the market. But is that all? So the stakeholders' hard question was, what is the kind of benefits in USD millions? We want hard numbers. So how do you do that? So we collected demand data, which is actual demand met, and as well as supply data, which is generation from each of the stations for 1 year on a 15-minute resolution basis. And we simulated, it's a virtual power market run. We simulated and we introduced real-time power market. And we analyzed how the behaviors of the market changes. And we also analyzed the benefits which this real-time market yields to each of these stakeholders. So let's pick up one of the utilities in one of the states, say for example, MP or Gujarat. By the way, there could be multiple utilities in one state itself. So pick up one of the states, say if it's a distribution utility, we said that if you had participated in real time, then your system cost would have come down by XX USD million. Say for a generation utility, if you would have participated in real time, your benefits would have gone up by probably USD million. So once those numbers were kind of churned out, so stakeholders were much more comfortable. There was a buy-in. We also analyzed whether there would be enough liquidity when we bring real-time market. So the average liquidity we analyzed would be around 1,000 megawatt for each 15-minute blocks. And that gave us confidence, or that gave CRC confidence. The third, also we also analyzed whether it could be a half-hour market or an hourly market. So different variations of the design considerations were also simulated. Now, with all these insights and inputs, CRC launched real-time market on 1st of June with a half-hourly market. Now, what that means is, say, for example, the delivery between 0000 to 0030 hours, these are combining of two 15-minute blocks. The gate closure is at 20 to 45. That means the schedules get finalized by 20 to 45. So if you want to kind of correct your position in the real time, you need to participate in the real-time market. Real-time market is a double-sided blind auction. So you will participate, you have to submit your bids between 20 to 45 to 23. Now, between 23 hours to 24 hours, the market clearing takes place. The system operator does all the clearing, checks the system constraints, and also prepares the schedules and communicates back to the buyers and sellers. Now, the next market run is from 0030 to 1 o'clock. For that, the gate closure is at 23:15. So it's a continuous kind of a half-hourly rollout market for 48 times in a day. Now, what's I'm trying to kind of drive through this presentation is, with so much of preparation, analysis kind of gone in before a particular launch, this was bound to be a success. Now we see the actual results of real-time market from 1st of June to 13th of June. We see there is enough liquidity, upwards of 1,000 megawatt, the kind of already simulated. I think we also simulated around 1,000 megawatt upwards for each of the blocks. Kind of the price which is realized is very competitive. So overall the system cost has gone down. So yes, congratulations to CRC on the launch of real-time market. It's not only a success for Government of India, but it's also a success for all other countries in the region who can now participate in this real-time market and also gain in the process. So the key lesson from this presentation is, for all the countries in the region, if you want to kind of bring any design change in your power market while you actually incorporate or while you accommodate the variable renewable energy, so you have to focus your analysis on those three pillars. There has to be an exhaustive kind of extensive international review. There has to be benefits demonstration of all these interventions. You need to check whether it brings benefits or not, so that there is a wide scale stakeholder buy-in. And then in how you do the change management. Yeah, that would be all for my presentations. And then the panel will take you through all the other interventions which has been talked about. Thank you so much.
Anish, thank you. I can't thank you enough. A brilliant presentation with a lot of good information. The discussion on real-time is, I think, exciting and foretells the future. But certainly your comments on the three pillars and the extensive review necessary to make these kind of fundamental choices at the government level is without a doubt one of the most important comments that we've that we've been thinking about over the last several years, and I think sets the pace for the future as governments start to think about how they're going to do this research, this analysis to make these policy choices to move forward. So thank you for that insight and the information. Thank you to all three of our presenters. Some very, very cool information, some great insights, and some great thought for food for thought. There is an incredible amount of information out there, as we know, and we're presenting a piece of it tonight. So we hope this provokes thought and conversation, dialogue, and perhaps some risk-taking. Opportunities to think about how you would do this in your neck of the woods. What would be your choices? What does your market structure already look like? How can you mold it into a system that will be beneficial for the largest number of consumers? And what are the analyses that are required to take those risks and manage those risks for the betterment of the population and the improvement of the markets, whether they're regional or country level or the larger super region? How do you sort of look at that and make those choices? Those are great conversations. We look forward to continuing those as we move along. So I'm going to give you like 5 seconds to take a deep breath and relax for those 5 seconds. Stretch, lift your hands up into the air, reach all the way to the sky, reach your hands out to the sides, reach behind your head, get that blood flowing at least in your upper body and your arms. Feel free wherever you are, at home or in office, to stand up, stretch your legs. Those of us on the screen will probably be relegated to staying in our seats for the time being, but we're going to jump into our panel, our expert panel this evening. And we have a host of some very, very excellent members of the panel. I will not go into a huge amount of detail to introduce each and every one of them, but I want you to know that they all come with their level of prestige. They all come with their experience and background, and they all come with really a significant story to tell us with respect to the issues we're going to talk about this evening. Matthew Wittenstein leads the work on power sector connectivity in the energy division of the UN ESCAP. And before joining ESCAP, he was the senior electricity analyst in the IEA, where he focused on the economics of generation and clean energy technologies and electricity market designs. We're very happy to have Mr. Wittenstein here tonight. Dr. S.K. Chatterjee, I'm sure many of you know as well. Dr. Chatterjee is the Chief of Regulatory Affairs at Central Electricity Regulatory Commission, or CERC, at the Government of India. He has a long experience of dealing with power sector reforms, especially in regulatory reforms, since its inception in 1998. He's an acclaimed expert in this field. He is a postdoctoral research fellow at the Harvard University Kennedy School in the United States. He has a PhD in management and an MBA in finance. We're happy to have Dr. Chatterjee here with us tonight. Kun Pirapat leads the IEA analysis on the challenges and best practices in integrating renewable energy into the power system, covering technical, economic, and institutional aspects. And he leads the grid integration analysis in many regions, including in China, here in India, in Thailand, and in the ASEAN region. Prior to joining the IEA, Kun Pirapat was a senior consultant at Intelligent Energy Systems, which is a consulting firm in Australia and provides energy modeling services. Mr. Rajesh Mediratta is the director at Indian Energy Exchange. He has played a key role in commencing the first power exchange in India. For example, Indian Energy Exchange. Rajesh has over 25 years of experience in apex organizations of India's power sector. His interests include power markets, retail competition, settlement systems, and deregulation of electricity sectors across the globe in many, many places. And our very good friend, Shubhranshu Patnaik, is the leader of the power and utility sector at Deloitte, India. And he is also advising USAID's Greening the Grid RISE program. He's been with us there for a while, and we are incredibly grateful to have him. He has over 24 years of experience in power consulting, spanning sector restructuring, power markets, and transitions to clean energy. So I think you can see there's quite a cast of characters this evening on the podium for us to hear from. I have a series of questions. The questions are necessarily those put together by another host of great experts, namely the energy team at USAID India in the what we call the CLEO office, and my very, very competent and brilliant colleague, Monali Zaya Nisra, and she has Hasra, and she has put together some questions that will dig deep into the issues and attempt to pull out from our honored guests on the dais the information that we think is really critical for all of you to take home tonight. So let me jump right in, first of all, with Matthew Wittenstein from ESCAP. Matthew, if I may, the way you see it, and based on your experiences, the challenges associated with trilateral, multilateral power trade, specifically in the ASEAN region. And if you can touch upon the lessons from the LTMS example that can be drawn for transitioning from bilateral to trilateral, multilateral trade, that would be excellent, because obviously those lessons learned are not only poignant, but they are relevant to where we're going in South Asia, certainly, and the rest of the work that needs to be done in Southeast Asia as well. Let me leave you with that, Matthew.
Sure. Michael, thank you very much for the introduction and for the really important question. And thank you also to the opportunity to participate in a really interesting event. First, let me start by saying that UNSCAP views connectivity as a really key strategy in the general trend and need for decarbonization of power sectors globally. Properly guided connectivity really can be a key strategy and tool to help countries meet their goals, in particular the Sustainable Development Goals. To that end, the UNSCAP last year published a study that I'd like to just quickly highlight, a roadmap on connectivity in the Asia-Pacific region, which highlights 9 strategies for increasing connectivity and tying connectivity to the Sustainable Development Goals. Now that touches on Asia-Pacific broadly, which of course includes South Asia and Southeast Asia. To your question in particular about Southeast Asia, where I've done quite a lot of work in my previous role at the IEA, at first glance, the Southeast Asian region really does seem like they're well placed to support the development of multilateral power trading and trilateral power trading. And in fact, a lot of the key enabling tools are there and in place. Thinking back to the key elements that Randy mentioned, political will, that's been expressed many times by member countries, including through documents such as the ASEAN Plan of Action for Energy Cooperation. There's also lots of great technical work going on, supported by HAPOA and ASEAN Center for Energy, for example, on grid planning in the form of AIMS-3, which I heard about earlier. And there are institutions in place. There's ASEAN as a whole, ASEAN Secretariat, and the various meetings and forums that it organizes. And then there are technical institutions like HAPOA, which can support a lot of great work. So why, given that, has progress in the region been relatively limited? There are a number of reasons, but I want to highlight just 3. One, which was touched on earlier, but worth emphasizing, there's a general lack of infrastructure in the region, and that's both cross-border infrastructure and domestic infrastructure. Some countries are simply better placed than others in the region to support trade because they have interconnectors in place. Many other countries, on the other hand, are still working on access issues domestically, and therefore have to first kind of work through those domestic grid issues before they can fully integrate with their neighbors. Now, there's a bit of a chicken and egg problem there. It's very difficult to develop grid, and especially interconnectors, when you don't have the demand for it. So there really is a need to do better planning and coordination of development, and there's where things like AIMS-3 can really help, but more work needs to be done on supporting infrastructure development in the region. There also are many existing bilateral trading agreements that was already mentioned earlier, and that's really fantastic because there really are a lot of opportunities to build off of those agreements. But unfortunately, the agreements that are in place don't really lend themselves easily to a multilateral trading environment. Generally speaking, they take 2 forms. One is in the form of unidirectional trades, which are priced, but are generally seen on a sort of equivalent basis to domestic generation. So I'm importing from a particular generator under a PPA across my border in a neighboring country. Or there are bilateral tradings, bidirectional tradings, which are unpriced. So I'm thinking, for example, between Singapore and Malaysia, where you do have an interconnector in place, but the power trading is mainly used for security reasons and security stabilization reasons, and there really isn't an emphasis on any economic trade of power across the border. There's also generally a need for political consensus, and that's somewhat reflected in actually the fact that the institutions that are in place are not fully fit to purpose to support multilateral power trading in the region. So I mentioned HAPOA. HAPOA is doing amazing work on technical issues such as grid codes, but there's a lot more to multilateral power trading than just grid codes. You need regulations in place, and the current collaborative body on regulations in the region, the ASEAN Energy Regulatory Network, is not nearly as well developed as HAPOA. It doesn't have permanent staff, no permanent budget, and the scope of their work is much more limited than HAPOA's is. There's also a lack of enabling institutions to actually take the lead on a lot of these the market design and market implementation pieces. And that's really critical too. It's not necessarily clear who among the ASEAN institutions would be the best place to actually develop and host a power market for the region. Now, you mentioned the Laos, Thailand, Malaysia power trade. I'll just quickly mention a couple things about that I think are really showing some of the positive developments in ASEAN and some of the lessons that can be learned. Laos, Thailand, Malaysia power trade is a unidirectional power trade involving 3 countries. I mentioned the three. Laos is selling power to Malaysia, being transited through Thailand. Now, that is a great demonstration of how three countries or a subset of countries, when the goal is clear and there's clear political alignment, can move very quickly, because they really did that quite quickly to establish that power trade. So there's a lot of great incentives. There's a lot of great examples of how if you have clearly aligned incentives and a clear direction of travel, you can get there without too much difficulty. But there are still challenges to taking that as a lesson for the region as a whole. Some of a lack of transparency when it comes to some of the details of the trade, such as how the wheeling charges are developed and priced, for example. And also general need to, right now that's all being organized by Thailand, which is fantastic, but then how do you generalize from a country-hosted market framework to a regional market framework? So a lot of great work being done there can be built off of, but there's a lot more work that needs to be done to really fully establish multilateral power trading in the region. And I'll stop there. Thanks again for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated. I'm dealing with the challenges of modern technologies. Matthew, very well articulated, and of course, some of the issues that you pointed out are those that are of most interest, and so thank you for kind of moving through that. It is, of course, changing of the guard here in South Asia, different from the Southeast Asian context, in that the trilateral and multilateral trading is a relatively new phenomenon. Led in some part by the Indian legislation that will stimulate that. And so there's a lot to be learned between the two sub-regions. And I think that the experiences that you and others have had in Southeast Asia in some ways can be transferred here into South Asia. So we're looking forward to more of that interaction. Thank you. Let me move on to my next panel member, the Honorable Chief of Regulatory Affairs at CERC in the Government of India, Dr. S.K. Chatterjee. Dr. Chatterjee, we're honored to have you tonight. Let me pose a question for you to consider and respond to our participants. I think you'll find it highlights some of India's successes, but it also kind of talks a little bit about what continues to need to be done, where we're going in the future, and how this first step or these multiple steps lead to more steps before we get to ultimate outcomes. So you just spearheaded the introduction of a real-time market here in India. And you have a roadmap for comprehensive energy market transition in India. And by the way, congratulations on those two big outcomes. I think the RTM is not only significant, it's groundbreaking in South Asia. But please share with us your experiences on how to build stakeholders' consensus for electricity market reforms. This is not an easy area to jump into and automatically assume that the variety of stakeholders, consumers and producers, generators and distributors, and the regulators are all thinking this through and wondering how they protect their interests, so to speak. While you're thinking through that, your experiences on how to build stakeholder consensus, please also share with us what you think what could you also elaborate on how important are markets such as RTMs, real-time markets, and ancillary markets in integrating large amounts of variable RE. Let me leave it there. I have 1,000 other questions, but I'll leave it with that. Please, Mr. Chatterjee.
Yeah. Thank you, Michael and Monali, for inviting me on this session. I have had the occasion of participating in such conference in Manila sometime back, a couple of years ago. It's indeed a pleasure and an honor to be part of this panel with so many distinguished experts. The presentations also were quite enlightening. Yes, Michael, as you rightly mentioned, I mean, the market design, especially in the power sector, has of late become a passion for me and us here in the policy making and the regulation making circles. So we have been working tirelessly on the market design aspect for for a couple of years now. And as was rightly pointed out, we try to learn from the international experiences, and we studied different market models that exist in other parts of the world, whether US or Europe, also in Australia, New Zealand. And in fact, we first thought, let's come up with a discussion paper or a staff paper, we call, and propose a vision. So the first vision statement came way back in 2018, and where we charted out a roadmap as to how we want the power sector in India to move forward. So we came up with 3 discussion papers which generated a lot of debate in the country. First in the series was the real-time market, followed by ancillary services, and then a big, what we often call a game changer, in the form of a market-based economic dispatch. It's basically, so a lot of thought has gone into it, but the challenge, as you rightly said, as a policymaker, as a regulator, the challenge that we face is consensus building amongst the stakeholders. That's the biggest challenge that you face as a regulator, because you have to, quite often the demands of the stakeholders are competing, and you sit in between and you try and balance the interests of both sides. So, often you find that you have reached a solution, but then again you find that possibly you are not addressing some of the major concerns of one set of stakeholders or the other. So in India, that of course it was a painful experience, and that's what we often call as a, as throes of childbirth. So whenever you do this kind of a revolutionary change in the market design, you have to go through a process. So as regulator, as policymaker, so this is in fact what we learn over a period of time, and this is what we are paid for, in fact. So here, in fact, as we studied the international experience, we found that India is so different in terms of several market design aspects. So while you can learn from international experiences, you cannot really do a copy paste. You need to find out your own solution, and this is one story which is equally applicable, in my opinion, to any country which is embarking upon a market design change in its own country, because every country, I'm sure, will have some unique features which it has to address in the, and the regulators and the policymakers have to find out their own solutions. In the process, you will be assisted by some experts, of course, and each expert comes with his or her own thoughts. But then you have to find out a solution that best suits your country and meets common grounds to the extent possible of different stakeholders. The biggest challenge that we faced was in terms of the kind of contracting structure that we have here in India. Most of the contracts in India are power generation contracts, are tied up in long-term power purchase agreement of 25 years. And our load serving entities are wedded to those contracts and are obliged to pay the fixed charge irrespective of whether they generate electricity or not. It's based on the availability of that the generators declare. And there are a number of other conditions. And as I said, that as the country has grown from shortage scenario to apparently looking surplus scenario now, these contracts have been structured accordingly. A lot of comfort has been given to the generators in terms of long-term power purchase agreement so that investments come. Similarly, the load-serving entities or the distribution companies have also been given the freedom to requisition, ask for that power at any time that they want, because they feel that they are the virtual owners of those generating stations. Why I'm taking a small time, taking time to explain this, that this was the biggest area of concern when we were designing the real-time market, because there were concepts like gate closure, which were introduced, which led to several other modifications in the way the contracting is structured. To some extent, the flexibility of the distribution companies to call back, requisition their contracted generators got restricted. In the existing current system, they had the flexibility of call back their contracted generators in 4 time blocks. In the new design, we said no, 7 to 8 time blocks. So there is a gate closure. So all these were new concepts, but then they were necessary ingredients to this real-time market design. But when we were designing, it was not only the market design, in terms of the half-hourly market, in terms of the processes of scheduling, the trades, etc. There were other contractual issues which needed to be resolved, and we have had tough time as regulators convincing the stakeholders on both sides. So if the DISCOMs would agree to this kind of a restriction being put on their flexibility of calling back their own contracted power, they would say, well, if at all there is a benefit from the market, please transfer all the benefits to me, because I am the virtual owner of that plant which is going into that real-time market making money. So we have to find out a balance. You have to make sure that the generators are also incentivized, and at the same time, you end up protecting the interests of these load-serving entities who are wedded to such generators for 25 years and have committed to pay their fixed costs. So it's as you rightly said, that it's a long story. I mean, we can talk at length, but given I would like to honor the constraints of time. But as you mentioned about my personal experience in terms of how stakeholder consultation, consensus building went through in this whole process. This is the brief experience which I thought I must share. I'll take two more minutes on the question around the market design and the vision way forward, which was the second strand of your question. So, as I said, that we have come up with the vision statement in terms of the market-based procurement of the ancillary services, and in the long run, the market-based economic dispatch, which is basically a reforms package for the day-ahead market, which again would be a big game changer. The two basic objectives or drivers of reforms are improvement in terms of efficiency and economy of the power system operation and renewable integration. If I were to summarize, I mean, there are so many other objectives. The real-time market leads to efficiency improvement and economy. People have been gaining a lot on both sides, generators as well as the distribution companies, compared to what they were doing until now. But at the same time, this is one platform which will also help integrate or mainstream the renewables, because 48 runs during the day. You can imagine the kind of, so the distribution companies, the renewable energy generators, given the infirm nature of this, they can go into this kind of a market, and we are also contemplating market-based procurement of ancillary services that also will go a long way in integrating the renewable. I'll stop here, and if we have some questions specific to the market design, I'll respond to that subsequently. Thanks. Over to you, Mike.
Dr. Chatterjee, thank you very, very much. Very kind of you. Regulators and policymakers have to find their own solutions that fit country and meet stakeholder expectations. That is a reoccurring theme. I've heard you speak to that issue in the past. I've heard others sort of highlight that in discussion, and I can't say enough about how poignant of a comment that is. The presentations that we make, the analyses that we offer up are pieces that inform those choices, but the choices are ultimately made by the sovereign nations and the municipalities that understand their own constraints and their own needs. We can be catalyst for good choice making, but that catalyst has to also extend out to recognize the important role that the governing bodies, the stakeholders of sorts, whether it's civil society, private enterprise, or government regulators play. And I can't say enough about how I like to hear that over and over again. Thank you very much. Let me move on rather quickly now, if you don't mind. From the system integration of renewables at IEA, Kun Pirapat is going to help us understand this particular question. Sir, what would be the value and the impact, as a matter of fact, of cross-border power trade in Southeast Asia on the operations and the economics of accommodating increased shares of renewables, particularly solar PV and wind, and reaching the RE targets, as different countries and the region as a whole puts together these RE targets and they're working towards those, and within the constraints of the development of solar PV and wind energy, increasing the shares of renewables, there is a certain function and impact on the operations and on the economics of accommodating that increase. And I wonder if you could share with us your experience and your views, please. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Michael, for the questions, and happy to join the panel discussions. ASEAN countries have set renewable targets in 2025 under the plans of actions of energy corporations. And also most of the countries in ASEAN have set their own renewable targets, both in medium and also in medium term and also in long term. And renewables, particularly solar PV and wind, it's going to play quite a major role in the generation mix in the years to come, because of course the cost of these two technologies are continuing to decline, and it has a promise to be very cost competitive with all the other conventional and also fossil fuel technologies. But of course, it has been mentioned in the presentations and the discussions previously that there are concerns with the growing amount of wind and solar PV because of their unique characteristics. These concerns touch upon technical as well as the economic aspects. Because as we know, the output of wind and solar PV are variable and quite uncertain. So the power system needs to be more flexible to integrate this increasing share of renewable penetrations. And this become quite a concern for both policymakers and also other stakeholders, particularly system operators. The cross-border interconnectors with the multilateral trade are seen as one of the key sources of flexibility that can facilitate the growing share of wind and solar PV. And of course, there are other resources, including power plant storage and demand response, but cross-border interconnectors it's a solutions that can be used in the near term as out to the long term. So last year we did a detailed grid integration study which looked at the cost benefits of regional power system integration in ASEAN with expanded cross-border interconnectors with multilateral trade, and how well it can facilitate the growing share of wind and solar PV, looking at year 2035, and we consider the economic aspect, operational aspects, as well as the environmental and policy related aspects. So the key findings of this study that we found that I think it's worth highlighting is that the cross-border interconnectors with multilateral trade has a great potential to enhance the flexibility of the ASEAN power sectors in every ASEAN member countries to integrate more renewables, particularly solar PV and wind. And this can lead to reductions of cost as well as emissions in the regions. The cross-border interconnectors in ASEAN can promote the effective utilizations of the assets by allowing different countries to share the resources to meet the rising demand in the regions, and of course with the mutual benefits to all of the countries. There are diverse range of renewable resources in these regions, including hydro, wind, geothermal, and of course solar PV. For example, I'll just give you one example, the abundant hydro potential in countries such as Myanmar and Laos PDR. And this can be exported to other countries with high demand, such as Vietnam and Thailand, via cross-border interconnectors. And this will lead to overall economic and also environmental benefits for all the ASEAN member countries. And of course, one of the important aspects is from the economic perspective concerning the cost. The operational cost savings from having more renewables will outweigh the additional investment costs in the cross-border transmission networks and will bring the net economic benefits. And of course, from the operational aspect has been discussed in previous presentation due to the intermittency of the variable renewables. The expanded transmissions can help the system operations, particularly during the period of high system stress, in order to cope with this variability and uncertainty that's coming from the increasing share of variable renewables. So just to summarize, the potential of cross-border interconnectors to connect low cost and also low carbon resources can flourish when there's a harmonized approach in planning the future power system in the ASEAN regions. So the aim is to ensure affordable and also reliable as well as sustainable electricity supply. So it is very important to build upon the existing efforts, particularly the LTM, which has been mentioned previously, to enhance the trading arrangements and also physical grid infrastructure in Southeast Asia, because this will enable a cost-effective integrations of renewables, particularly the growing share of wind and solar PV in the region. That's my response to the questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Pirapat. Very gracious of you. If I hear you correctly, cross-border trade has the ability to enhance the integration of renewable energy, reduce the cost, meet rising demand, and cope with the variability. Sounds like the Holy Grail. Sounds like we get everything out of it. And I know you don't necessarily mean it that way, but it does sound to me like it's a benefit that we can't afford to miss out on because it enhances the way we look at renewables integration. It provides us a platform to exchange ideas with neighbors, and it allows us to reduce risk by sharing that risk across generators and distributors, not just in one country, but across multiple countries. And I have to say that some sort of eclectic outcome from all of that is perhaps to build better relationships and better neighborly friendships between countries in regions all over the world. Certainly in Southeast Asia, ASEAN is an example of some success to that extent as well. Thank you very much, Pirapat. I appreciate your
Thanks
comments.
very much. Pretty much sharing, I would say sharing the benefits and then, diversifying the risk between those countries. Thanks again.
Pleasure. Thank you. Let me turn now to Rajesh Mendarata. He's the director at the Indian Energy Exchange, IEX. Director, the question I want to pose to you this evening, as we come down to the sort of last parts of our webinar tonight, really start to kind of bring this together and answer some of the pivotal questions that policymakers and market drivers have to really consider. So you operate I think arguably you operate the most successful power exchange in South Asia. from your experience, how important are power exchanges in driving regional power trade? And what do you foresee as the evolving role of power exchanges in the future? There are models that are different all over the world. Some are more successful than others, but one has to admit that here in South Asia, the IEX is an excellent example of how it can work. So tell us a little bit about your experience. How important are the power exchanges in driving trade? And what do you see as the evolving role of the power exchange in the future? Over to you, Rajesh.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Thanks, Monali and USA team. This is the first time I'm in a forum which is connecting two big regions in Asia, South Asia and Southeast. And it's really a fantastic move. Now, after having done some kind of integration across South Asia, the next step for us also to move across regions and how we can connect. And of course, that will come after there is some more strong interconnection across the region itself. Now, coming to the power exchange, what you asked is why it's important. Now, Christy, in the first presentation, Randy told about three models, and one model was harmonized bilateral trade. If you see what is the issue in bilateral trade is that you can harmonize it, you can standardize the terms and conditions of the contract, but what you cannot do easily is the price, which is the most critical part of the bilateral trade. And whenever this transaction happens through bilateral trade, there are two major issues which happen. One is that you don't know whether the price is right or not, because all the time there will be a question with the parties that whether this price is right or not. Second is that when you do a bilateral trade for maybe a longer duration, currently situation is so volatile in the world that you don't know how the whole power system will pan out over a period of 1 year. And your demand and supply will keep on changing. Sometimes you feel that you are stuck in a wrong contract, and then you can't come out because these contracts are a bit rigid. So when you have an exchange, what advantage you get is that you have participation is voluntary. Second is that you discover a real price from the market. And third important thing is that you have a flexibility. You can come and do trade whenever you want. You don't need to bind yourself in a contract. You can come on day-ahead basis. You can come on a weekly basis and something longer than that also. So the big advantage for exchange is that you actually have flexibility to come to platform at any time. You discover a price which is coming out of competition. And third part is the efficiency of the transaction, because you can do transactions very fast. You don't need to sign a contract. You don't need to negotiate it. And the same thing what we have achieved in case of India, and that happens across region. It's really great because in that case, you would have standardized everything, like whatever you're talking about, harmonized bilateral trade, you would have standardized terms and conditions. Only thing is you have to place your offers and bids and then do the trade and then discover the price. So that's very important part of exchange now, and that becomes more relevant now when you have renewables coming into the picture. And if you really integrate the countries through exchange model, you really can take advantage of exchange for managing your intermittency in the renewable. There are few countries like in India, like in South Asia, we understand Nepal, Bhutan has got large hydro reserves, so they can actually come and pitch in to give you peaking power. They can support you during ramp up, ramp down conditions. So whatever intermittency you face, you can handle it better when you have hydro projects, hydro resources also in place. And that you can manage it very well when you have an exchange in between. And and how this RTM we could do so well in India, that happened, that actually was made possible only because there is an exchange in between, which facilitated real-time transaction in a very shorter time frames. So when we did day-ahead market, started day-ahead market in 12 years back, and now we are starting, at that time we were talking about a day-ahead kind of integration. Now in case of real time, we have integrated the whole power system of the country in very close to real time basis. And if we do this across the region, even RTM can be done at the cross-border level, and if that happens, really we will be able to handle the renewables of intermittency also very well. So we see there is a big scope for exchanges to operate across the region. In Europe, we have seen the big advantage of getting all the countries across. So almost like 80 to 90% of total consumption of Europe is now getting integrated through the power exchanges. And the same thing we can do in South Asia. Similar thing we can do it in Southeast Asia. And later, if you see, we can actually couple these two regions also through exchanges. So benefit of price discovery, benefit of flexibility, benefit of efficiency, and very, very competitive marketplace, all those can be held if you have exchanges in place. Thank you. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you very, very much. Much appreciated. Some comments in there that we're going to save for the write-up and ask people to kind of reflect on those. But certainly, I think the take-home message there is that the power exchange is not only successful, but as it develops and grows in its strength and its scope, it becomes evident of its importance to real pricing, to real accessibility, and to incentives to the marketplace for those people who are taking that route to know that where they're going is safe and reliable. Thank you for those insights, Director. So we'll turn to our last panelist, but certainly not our least panelist. Shubhranshu Patnaik, those of you who know him, the senior advisor at USAID's G2G RISE initiative and a partner at Deloitte India. We're pleased to have him, as we always are in any of our gatherings, because he brings a whole lot of experience and insight into these issues. Shubhranshu, the question is this: what changes in the electricity market arrangements are you seeing globally, not just here in South Asia, but around the world? And what are the lessons for the region? So if we're able to look outside and quickly take calculus on what's happening around the world in the various places in East Asia and in Europe, certainly, the Russian example, what's happening in North America, if we're able to kind of look at those models as viable, what are the lessons that we learned that we can bring back home and apply here in South Asia specifically? Drawing from the Indian experience, can you walk us through the preparedness required for transition to those electricity markets once we decide on a viable pathway? Over to you, Shubhranshu.
Thank you. Thanks, Michael, and thanks for the opportunity. Yeah, so globally, not surprisingly, I think the impact of renewables, given that decarbonization is an overwhelming priority, the integration of renewables has posed a lot of challenges for wholesale electricity markets, primarily because of its nature of intermittency, which doesn't sit well with organized wholesale electricity markets, and also because of its near zero marginal pricing. So that also poses challenges for the market integration. Sometimes you see negative prices because of out-of-market revenues through incentives, and that's factored into attracting renewables. And this sits along with the challenges of capacity pricing and scarcity pricing, which have been sort of unsolved issues, already work in progress in several markets around the globe. So while we are seeing how these are being tackled elsewhere, it has interesting lessons for the region, both South Asia and Southeast Asia, because we know that our transition, given that there is significant unfinished developmental agenda, would be driven by renewables more and more as we go along into the future. And therefore, preparing our markets right, and in fact, leapfrogging, the experience that other jurisdictions have had is important. And I'll draw three lessons. I think one, that as far as renewables is concerned, to the extent possible, we should reduce and eliminate out-of-market incentives. Whatever incentives are supposed to be given should be through the market-linked mechanism so that the pricing in the marketplace is fair. Otherwise, we'll face challenges because renewables component, a proportion on the grid will only grow. And if you continue to give incentives which are out of market, then that distorts the market arrangement completely. Second, we have to move towards dispatchability of renewables as well. At some point, a fair pricing for dispatchability of renewables needs to be factored into the marketplace. And that's happening in the Western world. A lot of renewables are coming into the market, and there are specific arrangements in the marketplace for enabling participation of renewables directly in the market. And the third aspect is valuing flexibility. That's very important for grid security, grid stability, and of course for the for creating a level playing field. So valuing flexibility in whichever form, whether it is through the ancillary markets or having separate products, like in California they have a flexible ramping product now. Actually giving the right value of flexibility is also extremely important in the marketplace. And thinking through these design aspects is therefore extremely important in transitioning to full market operations. So over to you, Michael. I thought those were just quick bullet ideas from my side, bullet point ideas.
No, perfect, perfect, Shubhranshu. Thank you very much for sharing those, I think, practical elements as well as sort of theoretical or conceptual elements. I think one of the things I think that renewable energy specifically lends itself to is this need to examine other models and learn from and share information. And I have seen, especially in light of the current situation with the COVID-19, that developing these sort of pathways to resilience in the face of shocks, whether they are the kind of health crises that we're facing or economic shocks that are an outcome of those other shocks, or the social crises that occasionally happen from time to time, or the natural disasters. Recovering and building back better in the aftermath of these kinds of shocks should always be the kind of emphasized objective. And if we're going to do that, learning from other parts of the world and how they have specifically dealt with these kinds of shocks in the marketplace is valuable. And I think actually probably more than just simply valuable, but absolutely essential. So thank you for sharing that with us. So this brings us to the end of our formal panel. However, I know you've all been waiting, and I want to just share with you a couple things. One is that we've spent an excellent amount of time together, and you've now been graciously honored us with about what looks like about an hour and a half of time. And so we're about here at that point when we kind of want to wrap up. But before we get there, I think there are a couple things that we want to do before we finish off. And it is imperative that we kind of finish off in a robust manner. What I want to do is go back just a little bit to the opening session. And I want to recall a person who was very forward-leaning and shared with us a lot of good information. And that person, of course, is Randy Christensen from the Clean Electricity at IEA. Randy shared with us a lot of spectacular information, and it generated a lot of conversation. And some of that conversation boiled down into a question as we've been able to crystallize it. The other questions that have been posed, we appreciate people jumping in. Unfortunately, tonight we won't have time for all of them. So we're going to take this one question out, and then we're going to wrap the other questions up into a final outcome document and a recording and answer those questions from the guests and then share them with the audience. So this comes from Sarah Fairhurst. And Sarah asked the question to Randy. Given the lack of existing infrastructure and the very high cost of developing that infrastructure, Has anyone done the cost-benefit analysis of building this infrastructure that we've been talking about versus building out the distributed renewables and storage options to more or less achieve the same things? So the cost-benefit analysis, the analysis around options that get us to similar, if not the same outcomes. Have those been done, Randy? Can you share your thoughts with us?
Yes, I don't think necessarily that specific cost-benefit analysis has been done. I know that when, for example, USAID and ACE do the ASEAN Interconnection Master Plan, they definitely do cost analysis. And I do also think that in some cases, for example, you have Laos in the region, and Cambodia for that matter, and other countries that have a lot of hydro that is very capable of acting as a balancing resource for the region when integrating other more variable renewables. So I am not sure that I would say for Southeast Asia that it would be an either-or solution. It would be more an and solution. I think there's definitely a case to build out the distributed distribution grid and the storage within the ASEAN nations. But I also think that if you do the specific analysis, you would find that building out grid, especially the countries where there's options to do AC connections and so on, that would be a very cost-effective way to share resources.
Thank you very much. Let me get back here and see if I'm on. Oh, here we go. Thank you very much for that response, Randy, and taking the audience's questions. So with that, let me reemphasize that, in fact, there are several other questions, and we want to get to all of them, but we're already about, I don't know, Monali is telling me that I'm in trouble, and so I want to be considerate of her more than anybody. But I also want to be considerate to all the people that took time out to join us this evening. And the rest of the questions we will answer and incorporate them into recording and a notice that will come out to all the participants, answering those questions and providing you with a recording of the actual events this evening. So with that, let me point out that we are at the place, and I'm sorry, I'm following my notes here as quickly as I possibly can, right? We have wrapped up the technical presentations, but what I want to highlight is that it has been incredibly great having all of you, and we have a very, very special guest for us this evening, coming right out of Thailand and the Regional Development Mission for Asia of USAID based in Bangkok. And we're very honored to have him with us tonight. He is a senior advisor for energy to USAID in Southeast Asia. He has a boatload of experience. I first met him when he was last in Vietnam, doing similar kinds of work, and he brings an incredible, critical, thoughtful mind to this discussion. But he's here with us tonight to talk with us a little bit before we wrap up. And that's Scott Bartos. Scott?
Thank you so much, Michael, and good evening, everyone. Yeah, my name's Scott Bartos. I'm here in Bangkok at USAID's Regional Development Mission for Asia. And it's been a great honor to join the session's distinguished experts tonight and broaden my own understanding of cross-border trade and future energy markets. I want to thank all of our speakers, the panelists, all of the online participants. I've seen a lot of active Q&A, chats going on. All these contributions to making this a successful conversation. And especially the leadership of our friends and colleagues from the Government of India, the International Energy Agency, UNSCAP, Indian Energy Exchange, and of course, our USAID colleagues and partners. I was really excited watching tonight's excellent conversation, as I see we are all seeking to catalyze and accelerate Asia's energy sector transformation, which is something I'm very passionate about personally, and again, honored to have this as my profession. While I certainly miss seeing and speaking together in person over coffee at ACEF this year, the global COVID-19 pandemic has helped bring into focus for me how important it is for all of us, from governments, academia, civil society, and the private sector, to cooperate, share lessons learned, and apply state-of-the-art technologies to solve our most pressing global challenges by any means necessary, And that holds true for pandemics as we're going through now, as well as even larger challenges such as global climate change. As Michael mentioned, USAID's Energy and Infrastructure team in Bangkok is also implementing the Asia Enhancing Development and Growth through Energy, or Asia Edge initiative, to help upgrade and expand Asia's energy systems and build regional markets for the exchange of energy commodities. As we've also heard today, ADB estimates that building out the energy market in Asia will require investments of over $14 trillion in power infrastructure by 2030 to maintain the region's economic growth momentum. So it's critical that we actively seek out and work with private sector clean energy champions. To facilitate these investments, USAID is building partnerships with large clean energy corporate buyers in the region, such as Nike, Heineken, and Apple, as well as engaging the renewable energy developers seeking to enter the market. And as Michael alluded to, this was an exciting piece of work that I started while I was working with our office in Vietnam, and I'm continuing that effort here on a regional level. On the policy front, ASEAN member states are seeking to rely upon renewable energy to meet 23% needs by 2025. With ASEAN's ambitious goal in mind, it was very rewarding to learn from our experts today how cross-border power trade and energy markets increase system flexibility and resilience and open even greater opportunities to develop and dispatch the region's abundant variable renewable energy resources. These lessons will certainly fortify USAID's ongoing support for the ASEAN Interconnection Master Plan study. It's also been very gratifying to see experts from across Asia and the world coming together tonight to share lessons learned and create new South and Southeast Asian networks that can expand economic cooperation, create new friendships, and accelerate the deployment of advanced energy technologies. As I mentioned, I was kind of actively, while watching the speakers, I was chat and Q&A portions of this platform, and I'm excited to see, I hope a lot of the new networks that I was witnessing will lead to new colleagues finding common clean energy causes to pursue. Let me finish up by recognizing the leadership of my talented USAID India colleagues and the strong technical teams with whom we are honored to work with almost every day. These include G2G RISE and SARI in South Asia, as well as the Clean Power Asia and the Advanced Energy Partnership for Asia teams. By working more closely together through forums such as ACEF, I'm confident we will continue to accelerate deploying the clean energy solutions that science demands of us today. Thank you again for everyone's active participation, and we look forward to seeing you at additional ACEF deep dive workshops and side events organized by USAID. And please stay tuned for the launch of USAID's new web-based Asia Edge Power Sector Learning Series. This will start this July. Before I sign off, I have one final kind request to make, and that is I'd like to ask everyone to take an extra minute or two to complete the online survey that should be shared now. Your feedback is very important to all of us in our own work, as well as to the ACEF planners. Thank you very much to everyone. Be well and stay safe.
Scott, thanks so much. Your words ring true, and we appreciate the kind thoughts. I do want to kind of mention to everybody that Scott is a new father, and wish him a congratulations and all of our love and great wishes to him and his partner and the new baby in the world. Beautiful, the beginning of a new tomorrow and all the hope for the future. Thanks for being with us, Scott. As Scott mentioned, on your screen right now, you'll see an audience poll. It's quick, it's simple. We would appreciate everybody taking an opportunity to complete it and submit it, because it helps us do what we do better. This part of what we do is the outreach, the communications, the technical exchange, the knowledge exchange, and it helps us to make sure that the things we do get spread out to as many people as we can, because it's all about inclusivity and transparency and working together to find solutions to these myriad challenges in our world today. So with that, let me just say a final thank you. A thank you to our panelists. A thank you to our presenters early on. A thank you to the various organizations that we work with at Deloitte, Irade, Apt Associates, our projects in G2G Rise and SARI, and the CPA folks in Southeast Asia. We are grateful for all of the work. And I personally want to thank my colleague and good friend, Monali Hazra. As I mentioned earlier, I can never give her enough thanks because she works on this 24/7. She is, in fact, the single most unique powerhouse I've ever worked with. So thank you to Monali for her efforts. With that, please fill out the survey. We wish you all the health and safety possible in the world, given circumstances today. And we look forward to seeing you at the next event here at ACEF and the next event that USAID hosts or any of our myriad partners in the power sector that we're all working together with. Thank you and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you so much. Thanks, Matt.
How'd we do on the survey? Did we get them all back?
Yeah, I
did,
saw
we did.
some results, but it was too fast by the time, you know.
Yeah, but we did get good results. I'll share it separately, Manali, with you.
Yeah,
Okay.
okay. Cool. Did we do okay?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
okay. Yeah.
Super.
Okay. Thanks, you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you, Michael.
Thanks,
Thank
Michael.
you.
See you
Thanks.
soon.
Thanks, Dana.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Dara.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks, you guys. Thank Ripu.
Until next time.
Yes, until next time.
Thanks, Dana.
Absolutely.
Bye.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.